Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Soulcast Media live event. If everybody can see me and can hear me, give me a thumbs up on your end. It's how I know everything is working. By the way, it is so fantastic seeing everybody who are dialed in right now. We have over 100 of you who are dialed in from all over the world. And how fantastic is that? It is so great. Behind the scenes, we have folks from Brazil, India, Tanzania, here in the US. That's where I'm located. We have a few folks from the UK. This is so fantastic. My guest Gemma and I, we have so much we are so excited to share with you all today. So we are so honored that you are spending your evening, your morning, your afternoon with us. I promise you this is going to be a fantastic event all about communications, resilience at work. Now, before we get started, a few housekeeping tips. If this is your first time joining one of our Soulcast Media live events, welcome. We host these about every 2 weeks or so, and I always have a fantastic guest, just like my guest today. And we come on and we talk all things communications because my hope is to help you, inspire you, and empower you to become a better speaker at work. Because here's the thing, communications is one of those things that for many of us, we weren't taught how to do it. You know, you just kind of learn it at home, you learn it at school, and you learn it at work. But I have found through all my years teaching communications that it's a strategy. And if you are intentional about it, oh my gosh, it can completely transform how you're perceived at work, including the opportunities that you get. Now, one of the reasons why I even talk about communications is because I share with a lot of folks. I was not a good communicator growing up. Naturally, I'm pretty shy and introverted. So it was really hard for me to get out of that shell. And I started my career on TV. So if you can imagine, I was constantly surrounded by all these charismatic, loud, extroverted people in the office. So I really had to figure out how to find my voice. And what I love about today's topic, resilience, is I feel like there's actually a lot about communications and resilience and how these two things go together. So, my guest and I, we're going to be chatting about this and how you can utilize some of the tips, including the things that we do every single day. Now, before we get started, you all have access to the chat function, which I know a lot of you are sharing where you're dialing in from. By the way, keep that going. We also want to make this about you. So if you have any questions for Gemma and I, please throw it into the chat function because we are going to do our best to try to answer any questions that you have. Now, for those who don't know, my name is Jessica Chen, and I'm the founder and CEO of Soulcast Media. We are a communications training company. So we go in and we work with teams at companies as well as individuals to help with their communication skills. I do a lot of speaking on cross-cultural communications, public speaking, elevator pitches, you name it, we do it. And again, I love talking about communications. So without further ado, let's get started with today's event. I am so excited to invite my guest up today. In fact, this isn't the first time it's my guest Gemma up here. She's actually been here one other time. And I think Gemma and I behind the scenes, we're trying to figure out when that might have been, but it's been a while. But Gemma is amazing. She is a chartered psychologist, an author, as well as a fellow LinkedIn learning instructor. Now, I have 10 courses on LinkedIn and a lot of people have watched it. But let me tell you, a lot of people also watch Gemma's courses as well. So I'm excited to invite Gemma up so you can meet her. Hi, Gemma. How are
Hello.
you?
Good. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm very excited.
Very, very happy to have you here. So I know I did a quick intro of who you are, but for those who don't know, who are you and what's the work that you do? We'd love to know.
So I'm a psychologist. That's kind of my broad category of what I do. But I actually spend most of my time teaching people about how to thrive in uncertainty. So my research topic for my doctorate is resilience, which we'll be talking about today. But I talk a lot about overcoming failure or overcoming the fear of failure, I should say, because we can't overcome failure. Things like emotional intelligence, developing a growth mindset. And I'm actually in the process of launching a new community, which is very exciting. So it's been a lot of work going on my end. And obviously LinkedIn Learning Instructor as well, which some people on LinkedIn might know me for.
Yes, I think is it what? There's almost 3 million people have watched your courses, Gemma, or something insane?
Over 4 million now. I know.
Isn't that amazing? And so,
I
because
know.
Gemma, you talk about emotional intelligence, but I
Mhm,
think right now you're really focused on talking about resilience. And I'm sure there's
mhm,
a lot of overlap between the two.
mhm,
And because a lot of my courses are on communications, I feel like there's such a good synergy between the things that you and I are so passionate about. So, just to kind of kick it off, I mean, by the way, we have over 130 people who are here right now, which is so fantastic. And I think everybody here is interested in understanding what is communications and how does it have to do with resilience? So, in a nutshell, Gemma, and I know you've done a lot of research on this,
mhm.
what's resilience? Why is it important in the workplace?
So, resilience is our ability to overcome adversity, but not just to overcome it, but to learn something from that situation, which helps us to change things in the future. So, it could be that we learn something about ourselves in the process, or we learn a new skill in the process, or we learn something about other people or our surroundings in the process. We used to talk about bouncing back in the resilience world. So, imagine, I always use this analogy, but imagine you're training for a marathon and you got to run 26 miles in this kind of final marathon, and in your training you up your mileage kind of every week. I guess I did a half marathon years and years and years ago, and I can't remember the exact training, so no one hold me to this, but the idea is that you might start running 2 miles and you might up it to 3 miles. If we use this bouncing back analogy, then the idea would be, imagine you injured yourself and you've got to the 10-mile mark in your training. So you've successfully trained yourself to run 10 miles. You injure yourself and you have to be rehabilitated. So you might go to physio, you might need a rest, but then you get back to your training. If we just want to bounce back, then we're happy just to get back to that 10-mile mark. We're happy to run 10 miles and say, we're back on track. That's it. I don't need to learn anything more. I don't need to go any further. Whereas if we're bouncing forward, we're taking what we learned from that situation and helping us to get even better, to run 11 miles, 12 miles, and eventually that 26, I think it's 26.2 mile mark. So the whole idea is that we're using that experience and what we might have learned to help us develop in some way. And that can look like different things in many different scenarios. But the whole point is kind of using that adversity experience. It doesn't mean that you have to do it perfectly, by the way, but it means using that to kind of bounce forward in the future.
I love that analogy so much, and I will say I had trained for a half marathon many years ago too, and I started out being able to run just half a mile, and what you said in terms of training up is exactly right. It's like you start with the 1 mile and you're like, "Yes, I
Mhm.
finished 1 mile," and then you kinda start then you go to a mile and a half, and you kind of work up from there. But I love your analogy because it's true. People say bouncing back, but you're actually saying bouncing forward,
Mhm.
and I know people may say, "Oh, it's just semantics. It means
Mhm.
the same thing." But what you're actually saying is it's actually more than that. It's actually when you consider and you think about bouncing back, but bouncing forward, you're taking what you learned in that process of perhaps stumbling, falling, getting injured, reflecting on it, and then using it to become better. So,
Yeah.
Gemma, how does this have to do with communications? And I think this is something that I'm very interested to get your thoughts on communications because, when I work with a lot of folks on communications, it actually a lot of times centers around confidence and
Mhm.
how people feel they don't have that confidence to speak up in meetings, do presentations. So, how does communications and resilience, how do they go together?
There's two ways that we need to think about this, and we'll probably kind of delve into both of them today. One of them is how we develop our communication skills and why we need resilience to be able to do that. And the second thing we need to think about in the workplace is how we communicate about resilience in general, how we talk about it. So think about that kind of like first thing that we need to address is when we are enhancing our communication skills, which most of us have had to do at one point or another. I'm certainly still in that boat. I wouldn't say I'm the best communicator in the world. And really, that's my job. My job is to communicate kind of my research or what I'm thinking or, what's going on in the world. It doesn't always go to plan. You don't always know exactly what you're doing. And like learning any new skill, it's really hard, or it's probably actually impossible to be confident in doing something new when you've never done it before. Because actually, it's the practice of doing something that builds confidence. We don't have the confidence, and then all of a sudden, we don't mind putting ourselves in situations where we have to communicate differently or do public speaking or raise our hand in a meeting or do a presentation.
Yeah.
That confidence only comes with practice, like making ourselves do it.
Yeah.
And for lots of us, the process of, raising our hand in a meeting or speaking in a way that we're not used to, whether it be in a meeting, whether it be a presentation in front of people, anything we're not used to. So it isn't, when we think about a new skill, we're not going to know what we're doing. And the chances are it's going to be uncomfortable, which is adversity. That is an experience of adversity for lots of us, myself included in this. And as we know, building resilience helps us to firstly overcome adversity, but also grow from that as well. And if you think about the first time you had to do a presentation in front of someone, I can't think of the exact example where I had to first do that, but I can definitely think of the period of my life where I was first training people in an organization. I had no clue what I was doing. I'd had no formal training. I got let loose on groups of people within an organization. I'm to this day, I'm not entirely sure how I even got that job or why. And it's something I wanted to do, but I certainly didn't have the confidence to do that. I would go and train the trainers in a different part of the world and come back and deliver it in our region. I never had I never thought, oh, I'm really nailing this. I'm doing an amazing job. But what I did have is, first of all, the courage to give it a go. And I was able to understand that I had to do that to develop, to get to the career that I wanted or to take that next step. And also, and I don't think I was very good at this at the time, but looking back, this is something that I've learned from that situation. Rather than looking when things go wrong as a failure, I now look at that like a learning experience. And really, you might feel a bit embarrassed sometimes, or you might think, oh, I said the wrong thing, or I didn't say it the right way, or I didn't say anything at all. I wanted to put my hand up and I didn't. But that doesn't have to be a failure. That's something, if you use that, the only failure is not doing anything with that information and making that same, acting in the same way again and again. If you can take something from that, think about, how did I feel not putting my hands up when I really wanted to? Okay, I'm going to have to make an effort to do that. I'm going to have to find the courage somewhere to do that. Or how did I feel when I said the wrong thing, or I had the wrong figures on my slide? All of these things happen to me, by the way. Or when someone asked me a question, I couldn't answer it. We as humans, it does feel uncomfortable, but also we are made to overcome that stuff. Yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, it's undesirable. Yes, it's not a nice, no one wakes up in the morning and thinks, yeah, I really want to fail today. I really want to make a mistake. Of course not. But we do have the capability to overcome that. A lot of it is just how we think about the situation.
I think for many of us, though, it's so easy to feel stuck.
Mhm.
And I often think back to early on for me, I often felt stuck at work because I felt like I was working so hard. I was doing the work. Anybody who said, "Hey, Jessica, can you help with this?" I said, "No problem." But for some reason, I also felt often overshadowed, overlooked. I felt like I still didn't get the opportunities despite working really hard. So I always felt like I was in this conflict of, I know I'm doing work, but why am I having so much trouble getting those bigger and better opportunities? And in many ways, I felt like that's a very internal feeling, right? You do the work and you're like, oh, I feel so frustrated. And that's one of the quickest way to burn out, actually. And
Mhm.
I'm curious, by the way, if anybody has felt that way at work, where you're like, I feel like I'm working so much, yet I'm not getting the credit, let us know in the chat function. And for me, I realized a lot of it had to do with cultural understanding too. I mean, obviously I'm Asian, and I feel like in our culture, we weren't always taught to put yourself out there, speak
Mhm.
up at work, right? Culturally, these are just weren't things that I was taught growing up. And so it took me many, many years, honestly, to figure out, how do I find this balance? And to be honest, a lot of it has to do with communications. And it's not about boasting or showing off, but it's like, how can you talk about your work to show why it benefits other people? And I feel like when you can kind of reframe that, communications becomes a lot easier. Gemma, you
Mhm.
mentioned something about adversity and having had bad experiences, or just not feeling like you did really well, right? one of our mutual friends is Amy Bateman, and she was here not too long ago, and she talked about the word courage. And I think courage perhaps has something to do with resilience too, right? It's like,
Mm.
but how does somebody even get there, right? It's like, conceptually you have to get up and do a presentation, but your mind is still here. How does one get from this stuck mentality to, let me just do it? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's one step at a time. If your goal is you want to be an amazing presenter, firstly, you've just got to start doing it. Maybe there's ways that you can do a little bit of that. Maybe you can do it in front of a kind audience to start with that or maybe you don't have that choice. Maybe you're kind of just thrown in at the deep end. And there's, so build your tolerance up slowly if you can. I know that's not always an option, but if that is an option and it's something you want to work towards, think, okay, how can I take small steps towards this? Like, what's the first step? Okay, maybe it's writing a presentation. What's the next step? Okay, maybe it's testing that in front of people who I know will be kind to me. What's the next step? Okay, maybe it's doing a part of a presentation somewhere, or asking if I can co-present with someone until you kind of build yourself up. So that's one way you can do it, is this kind of slow building of tolerance, and think about it like kind of stepping outside your comfort zone, one tiny step at a time. So you're just nudging that comfort zone boundary a little tiny bit further each way. But the other way to do it is, if you don't have a choice, I was talking to someone this week, actually started a new job, and from the get-go, they have to do these big presentations, which are not necessarily the same as the kind of thing they've had to do before, in front of a very knowledgeable audience, which I always find quite daunting. But they don't have a choice. They've had to learn to do it. And this person was saying they've had loads of like physiological responses to that. So not feeling well doing it, or finding it like experiencing that fight, flight, or freeze mode doing it. And I think here, when you just have to do something, the only tactic you can really use with that is reminding yourself that you have the ability to figure this out. You don't have the answers. If you haven't kind of nailed some amazing presentations in the past, and you don't have that experience to look back on, think about the other things that you've overcome. Think about the things where, when you did something, like when you look back, you had no idea how to do that months before. You learned how to do it. And when I say like, you can find ways to do this thing, remember, it's not all on you. It could be support from people. It could be a mentor that's going to help you. You don't have to have all the answers. And I think so often in the workplace, I was talking about this yesterday, actually, I was running a presentation for one of my colleagues all about fear of failure. And I think so often in organizations, we think we have to project the perfect version of ourselves, and communication and presenting are big areas where that happens, because you are in front of people, or you are telling someone something, or getting your thoughts out there, and that can be daunting for a lot of people. However, you don't have to do that on your own. You could have a mentor that might be helping you or guiding you. You could have a support system who've got nothing to do with the workplace, who you can talk to beforehand, talk about how you're feeling, and or talk to them afterwards about what you've learned from the situation. So first thing I'd say is, remind yourself of a time where you overcame a massive challenge at some point. It could be getting a degree. It could be like I was saying earlier about the job, that I don't know how I even got that job. But if you've done these things before, even if it's in different contexts, not about communication, but even if you've done these things before, where you have figured something out as you've gone, you can do that again. And it won't be perfect to start with. And that's also all right. We don't have to always display this kind of perfect, like finished version of what we are in the workplace. And I know that's hard. It's often competitive. So, if you're not presenting, someone else might be presenting. I totally understand that. But I mean, really, who can live with that pressure? Like, we are allowed to be human too. You're even allowed to say, this is the first time I've done this, or I'm still figuring this out, or that's okay too. Or you don't have to address it, but just minimize that pressure on yourself. And then the other thing you might want to think about, if you absolutely have to present something, is think about kind of breathing techniques. So calming your body down. It's something I do all the time. I do something called box breathing, where you breathe in for the count of 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4, in for 4. And that calms down your nervous system. So it means that you have, I was going to say, a little bit less adrenaline and cortisol running through your body, but not necessarily. But at least it gives you a moment to think as well. And I think that can be really useful. And also remind yourself that absolutely no one on this planet knew what they were doing when they first started presenting. Everyone has learned.
You mentioned so many few things that I want to reiterate because they're so important. And I think that's the need to feel like it has to be 100% perfect before you can go out there and talk about it. I think nowadays there's a lot more forgiveness in terms
Mhm.
of people are much more open minded to hearing how's the process versus what's the final product. And sometimes I feel like there's a strategy, a communication strategy when it comes to let me share the process of me putting together this project. Let me share the process of me talking about the ups and downs because I feel like people generally actually become more invested in what you're doing if you can be open about communicating what's going on. I think sometimes people hide behind the work that they're doing until they feel like, okay, this is perfect. But really, what's perfect, right? What's perfect? And I think you mentioned something, Gemma, about just starting. I
Mhm.
remember when I first started out on TV, I mentioned to everybody I started out in news, and I was a very shy and introverted person. But at the end of the day, I signed up to work on TV, meaning I had to talk, right? And I remember the first time I was asked to go live. And that is it's kind of similar to this, right? But you're on a camera and I remember they said it was a breaking news situation. You got to go. And already, if you can imagine, it's like chaotic. And you're like, and I was, I think, I don't know, maybe like 2021 at the time. So like I was like young and just right out of school. And I remember thinking, oh my God, like that was just kind of in my mind. And then once I finished, well, first of all, it was not a perfect presentation. But at that moment, I remember once I delivered, I finished delivering that story, that project. I was like, you know what? That first time is always the hardest time. It can only get easier from there. Now, it doesn't mean other times won't be challenging. They'll certainly be challenging, but now you can say, I did it.
Mhm.
I did it.
And it's
That's
worth the
huge.
discomfort. It's worth how it feels in your body. It's worth the stress beforehand. I'd love to say to people, I can give you a strategy where you'll never feel stressed about how to present or communicate in a different way. But I can't. Like that's not possible. I still worry about some things that I'm presenting, but all I can say is you will get through it. I think we have to hold on to that. And things don't have to be perfect. And like you said, once you've done it once, at least you've got some experience in the bag. And look at it like that. This first time isn't my perfect, it's my experience time. Like I'm building experience so I can grow from this.
Mhm. And one of the things that you mentioned, which was like, because we're talking about resilience, is, as humans, we need to give ourselves more credit in terms of trusting that we have really good critical thinking skills. I
Mhm.
mean, we can work through things in our mind, especially if we feel, again, stuck. If we're like, ugh, I don't know exactly how to do it, or I'm not sure how it's going to be. We all, as humans, have the ability to think through things, right? We're taking experiences that we've had, we see what's in front of us, and how can we kind of marry the two? And honestly, sometimes the best answer is just trial and error, right?
Mhm.
You go in, you ask for it, you say something, and you see how it's received, but at least you did it. And then now you can have something to work off of.
Yep.
Again, I think with this talk today, I really want our audience just to feel that whatever it is that they want to do, whatever it is that they want to say, whatever it is they want to ask for at work, sometimes you just got to do it. There may not be that perfect time,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think, if you think about your work, you teach people the skills of how to build really good communication skills. And of course, we need that. Like any new skill we're building, we need that. But there's also that mindset bit as well. Like we say, something's holding you back. You feel stuck, or um, you're not sure what to do. It's easier to avoid it rather than do it, and that needs work as well. So yes, build your skills, get better. But like we said earlier, the only way you build confidence is by doing something, and of course, learn about it. Of course, figure out what exactly you need to do to hone those skills. But most importantly, practice. Don't just learn it and do nothing with it. And then second thing is thinking about, okay, what's going on in my head? Why does it feel so difficult? Or what do I need to do to just make this happen? And I think if you can marry those two together, you've got the perfect formulation really for any kind of communication, because what you learn in one space that you might be presenting in front of an audience, you can then take to another area, like asking for a pay rise, or I don't know, approaching someone about a new job, or even personal life, some of the more challenging conversations we might have.
It's funny because, by the way, I'm looking at the chat and it's so great to see people's different thoughts of, things that they have had to overcome and how they overcome it. Disha, I think you're saying practicing a presentation in the mirror or try singing. People are not comfortable hearing their own voice. They find it strange. It's funny because, I remember early on when I would watch replays, and I think, because a lot of times we're all on Zooms now and you're like, you hear your, how have you ever experienced this, Gemma, too, where you hear your own voice on the phone? You're like, gosh, is that what I sound like? It's
Yeah,
like
I hate
people,
it.
it's like, oh, that's what people are hearing. And
Yeah.
I think, though, we have to get comfortable with the sound of our voice, because if you aren't comfortable with the sound of your voice, you will always feel like that's a barrier to you wanting to put yourself out there.
Mhm.
Now, I'm not a tone of voice expert. I have my other friend, Dr. Wendy Laborn. She is a tone of voice expert, and she has all these fantastic tips on how we can control our voice. And it's not just the sound, it's also like how fast you're speaking, how high or how low. In fact, I just did a LinkedIn video on this on my profile. But basically, when it comes to just even our voice and even communicating, saying something in meetings, it's knowing that there's actually multiple ways we can say something, and it can change how it's received. So I know this is not a communications 101 talk, but I just want to encourage folks to know that communications is a skill, and it's definitely something that can be learned. And,
Mhm.
whether you have access to LinkedIn Learning, I mean, LinkedIn Learning is a great platform, but I always feel that, like, people think communications is just what you say, but it's so much more than that. There's so much strategy that goes on behind the scenes.
Mhm.
Um, there's a question, Gemma, that I saw in the chat function that I want to get to. And it's a really interesting one, but somebody was asking how, if they want to find a mentor or a
Mhm.
sponsor at work, which, by the way, they're two different things. If you want to find a mentor or a sponsor at work, how can you go about speaking up, asking, and let's say they say no? What that might have to do with resilience too. But what are your thoughts on putting yourself out there and asking for something that you want?
It's really hard. Like anything you want. I'm in the process of launching a podcast, and I find it really hard asking guests to come on the podcast. And actually, to be fair, I've had to outsource quite a bit of that. But even though I'm behind, like even though it's not me doing the asking, I still feel terrified of that. So I totally get that. There's tons of things that I find really hard to ask for. I think let's go back to that kind of mindset bit, because I think that's where we need to start. Is the discomfort of asking and what could come of that worth missing out on that opportunity? Because yeah, they might ignore you, they might say no. I mean, what else? What other bad things can happen? They can say no or they can ignore you. I think those are kind of the two things that we would fear the most in that situation. Um, and yes, that's an uncomfortable place to be. It's not a nice place to be. But if you let that imagination of that discomfort, because that might not even happen, rule your life, then you're going to miss out on opportunities that you might be able to make happen. Because let's be honest, it's not coming your way. You're making this stuff happen, and that's really how most progress is done in life. So I would, in terms of contacting people, I would always make it obviously super friendly, super quick. Like, don't waffle too much about what you're asking for. Also, be upfront straight away. It's it can be really useful to build a relationship with someone, particularly in a mentoring capacity. If you ask them to be a mentor, don't be dishonest about that. Don't just build a relationship because you want to cut to the chase and ask that question. I think it can take a long time
Mhm.
to build a relationship with someone, or gain their trust to be able to ask that. So you have to be prepared for that as well, because lots of people will have tons of people asking them to do this stuff. So be honest, be to the point, be really clear about what that person can do for you when it comes to mentoring. One of my pet peeves in life in general is when people kind of ask me for time or to do something and I don't really know what they're asking for. So, okay, here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking I really need help with my presentation skills. It's something I really want to develop. I was in your presentation recently, did a really great job. Are you taking on any mentors at the moment? And that is the key question. You're not saying, will you be my mentor? Because that's a really awkward situation. If the person has to say no, it's awkward for them and it's awkward for you. So asking the question, are you taking on any new mentees at the moment? Leaves it open because they could say, actually, I'm really busy at the moment. Well, I've got a full schedule of mentees that I'm helping at the moment. So I haven't really got any capacity. Also means if they just don't want to do it, it gives them a get out without being rude. They don't have to ignore you then, because that's even worse, I think. Because in that question, you're implying that they do mentor people, particularly if you're in the same organization as someone. I think sometimes that's quite a nice implication that, we're all helping the next, helping people within that organization develop skills. But it gives a really nice get out clause as well if the other person doesn't want to do it for some reason. And to be honest, you don't really need to know what that reason is, as long as they're polite to you. And just keep trying. If it doesn't work there, ask someone else if they would be doing that. Sponsorship is different and it's trickier. It's a whole different topic. Because you can't always choose your sponsors. Sometimes it'll be someone you work with and they will naturally be doing that. It's very hard to ask someone to be your sponsor. Definitely can be done. But that's more building relationships with people who will be in rooms that you're not in yet. So, and like kind of displaying the work that you can do and your potential and your capabilities. But mentoring, give them a get out clause and just be complimentary, be honest about why that person would be an amazing mentor. Also be specific about their commitment. So i.e. it would be great to grab a coffee once a quarter, or it'd be great to have, if you've got time, like a 10-minute chat once a month, or, be respectful of the other person's time as well. But I think that's a great question.
So the difference between, for those who don't know, the difference between a mentor and sponsor is a mentor is somebody who can just give you advice from time to time, somebody you can just call up or email and get their thoughts. A sponsor is somebody who is in a position, a place where they can endorse you, advocate for you when you're not in the room. They're saying really good things about you. That's a sponsor. A mentee can be a sponsor and vice versa, but the roles are a little different in a particular situation. Now, one of the great things that you mentioned about this is, how do you reach out to them? And you said, you could also ask, but you said be specific. I was actually thinking about how one of the most important things about finding people, mentors or sponsors, is just understanding that there are people as well. And at the end of the day, people want to connect with people who they feel they see something in them. I don't know what that is, but they see something in you, right? And they want to connect with you too. And this can mean somebody at a higher level seeing something in you that they're like, wow, this person reminds me of me, or I really like how hardworking this person is. I want to help this person. And so at the end of the day, it's really about trying to build that relationship with that person. It's not just asking for something. And I think that's what sometimes at work, it can feel so transactional a lot of the times. Like you do this, I do that, input, output. Right? I mean, it's understandable why, because it's just of the construct of what work is. Like you're there to deliver, you're there to perform. But I think if you want to think long term, one of the most important things is to just constantly foster relationships with people. Because even though you're not getting anything immediately, let's say out of that connection, the fact is that relationship might help you later on. It's playing that long game, right? I mean, it's thinking about who's there, who can you connect with, and ultimately, who do you have chemistry with, right? People connect with people who they have chemistry with. And again, if you reach out to somebody and they say no, what's the worst thing that they can say? Not now, no, right? Nothing good ever comes with us just sitting there and hoping, right? Hoping is important, but nothing good comes out of just sitting there and hoping. You have to get out there. So,
Yeah, 100%.
so one of the other questions that I saw in the chat functions was really have to do with just confidence, because I feel like many people, they know what they want to do, or they have this dream of where they want to be, where they want to go, right? But what happens, Gemma, if they keep feeling like they're getting knocked down? Let's say they've been told no more than once, right?
Mhm,
We know that no is part of the process, but
mhm.
how do you feel like you're not getting so sad or, um, just discouraged? How does somebody jump back from that?
Well, there's kind of two ways of looking at this. So the first is, how can I cope with that and keep moving forward? And really, that's what building resilience is all about, and building resilience takes time. There are lots of different strategies that you can use. So think about my LinkedIn learning course of resilience, for example. That's just strategies. The whole thing is try these things, um, build them into, like, choose the ones that work for you, build them into your routine. And it's something, resilience isn't an end goal. You're not resilient or not. It's something you have to keep working at all the time, because our circumstances are changing and we're changing as people. So how we respond to things is changing, how we feel about things is changing. So there's kind of two sides to this. One, yes, building the skills to be more resilient, but the other side is knowing when to give up, because no one ever talks about that when it comes to resilience. The whole, and this is a big misconception around resilience, in that people think it's grit. So grit is passion and perseverance. So it's kind of keep going no matter what. Now, that is a part of resilience sometimes, and it's a brilliant tactic to use at times. However, it's not the whole thing. Sometimes we have to know when a situation isn't working for us, or actually it's got to the point where it's not healthy for you to be continually adapting to something when it's causing so much damage to you. And maybe that's a time where you have to change something. You might have to make a difficult decision. And that kind of ties into the dark side of it. There is a dark side to resilience. We
Mm.
can be too resilient potentially, where we just keep pushing through, just keep kind of dealing with this adversity, but actually we're not properly dealing with it, and it can catch up with us at a later point, and can affect our well-being. So think about burnout, for example. That's classically what we see. So when it comes to being knocked back, I think you have to ask yourself, is this worth it? And take some time to think about that. Take a step back. Because obviously in the moment, it probably feels like it's not worth it. When I get knocked back with things, I'm like, oh, it's not worth it. I don't want to do it anymore. It's just really painful and I just don't want to. I know in the back of my head that it is worth it in the long run. Like, the pain is worth it. But you might get to a point. It's important, if you do get to a point, you're like, actually, this just keeps happening and happening and happening, and I have to cut my losses over here. It's not, the thing's not going to work, or it's not healthy for me, or that's okay too. So kind of accepting when it's gone far enough for you is part of resilience as well. It's not just about pushing through. However, if you're thinking, okay, I do need to keep working at this, there are loads of ways that you can build your resilience. So think about support. It's one of the biggest factors of resilience, and one of the most one of the least talked about, because we think it's all about us. What can I do? How can I push through? And actually, people that have really good support systems can often deal with a lot more and often bounce forward a lot better, because you've got someone to talk to. And it could be someone in a workplace, it could be someone, it could be friends, family, it could be people you see when you're doing a hobby, it could be a mentor, it could be a coach, it could be a therapist potentially. But that support system can help you to cope with those challenges, and can also potentially provide you with advice about what you might want to try, or things that you might want to do. But it's also, think about this. Try and think about the experience and reframe it. So think about your perspective. So much of resilience is about perspective, how you see the world.
Yes.
Can you change this into an experiment? I'm trying something. I don't know if it's going to work. So think about, so I'm launching the Mindset Matters Hub. This is the subscription community I'm launching. I don't know if it's going to work. Like, in theory, it should work. I'm thinking there's a lot of subscribers on LinkedIn that are reading about mindset stuff every time I publish it. We've got the course on LinkedIn Learning. So in theory, there's an audience there that want more of this stuff in different formats. But I don't know. Like, are they going to like the platform that we've chosen? Are they going to engage with the new courses that I'm filming? We're doing masterclasses, which I know you know about. Like, are people going to engage that? I don't know. But I have to, rather than fixating on, I have to come up with the right solution, which is easy to do. And I get, like, that's where my mind wants to go. That will just hold me back, because then I don't know what the right solution is, because I haven't tried it yet. I've got to try it to get, like, feedback to figure out if it's going to work or not. And it's going to be a hard process. So I think one of my biggest things about resilience is thinking about things as an experiment. Stop thinking, I've got to get this right. This is the final try. This is the end goal. I want to do this exact thing. I want to, we're so binary in our goals, like, oh, I want to start a business that turns over this much money, or I want a promotion within the next year, and I'm not saying don't have those things to work towards, because that can be really helpful to make you take action. But maybe look at it like an experiment. Like, okay, this is what I'm trying to get to. What if I try this? Like, just let me try it. Just let me try. I'm going to learn as I go. Things are going to go wrong. I'm going to learn when things go wrong, and I'm going to tweak it as I go. It just takes the pressure off a little bit. So looking at it like an experiment instead of a solution, because we don't know what the solution is yet when we try something new.
And that's a huge perspective switch, right? It's just treating whatever you're doing as an experiment, because that also gives you a little bit of grace, right?
Mhm.
If you fail or you're not happy with it, you're like, you know what? At least I was trying and I was just
Mhm.
kind of testing it out a little bit. I think oftentimes we forget that, whoever it is that you admire, and this is a question for our audience, like whoever you're thinking about when I ask, who do you admire? Chances are that person is constantly experimenting too. Let's say
Mhm.
you look at, the top CEOs in the world, right? They're constantly at their company coming out with new things, launching new things, putting out new ideas. Do they know whether consumers and customers are going to like it? They might
No.
have a decent feeling, right? But they don't necessarily know either. So what I want to say is for our audience, it's like nobody really can know for sure. And no matter how much data is out there, no matter if all the arrows are pointing at this one thing, there are a lot of other considerations that we just don't really know. I mean, that's kind of like the unpredictable nature of just living, right? You just don't really know, but you can always try your best, right? And
That's
that's
the thing.
that's the thing. You just try your best. So there's a really interesting question that I want to get to in our audience. And by the way, if you have any questions for Gemma and I, this is your chance to talk. Oh my gosh, I can't believe we've been chatting for close to 45 minutes. I just looked at the time and I was like, wait a second. It's already this okay, this is just flying by so fast. But okay, one of the questions that I want to get to is, so do you have any advice on how to deal with a superior who keeps doubting your abilities? They're doubting your abilities. Maybe they're not being very nice to you, maybe even threatening that, hey, this might not be a good fit anymore. How do you overcome something like that? And by the way, that is such a difficult situation to
Yeah.
be in.
It's a horrible situation, and it's definitely something that I've experienced before, for sure. And ultimately, you've got to control the controllables. You're not in control of how someone else behaves, so you can't change that. All you can do is prove what you're capable of, and you may not be getting the opportunities to do that, because sometimes in these situations it can be frustrating because you want to prove what you're capable of, but you're not getting those opportunities. Maybe someone else is getting those opportunities. But again, figure out what's in your control. So, are there opportunities where you could have a discussion about it? I.e., this is what I really want to work towards. Like, would you support me in being able to do that? What can I do to improve my skills, or what can I do to take the next step at work? Like, kind of gauge if they're willing to support you in that or not. Sometimes that conversation can kick off because it shows the other person that you're committed to this, and saying that, like, I'm really committed to demonstrating my potential and also growing as well and developing more skills. That can kick off a different chain of events where you might get more opportunities, or it might be noticed what you're doing, or it might not. The other person might be completely closed off for whatever reason, and the chances are it's not to do with you. And think about it like that. There's stuff going on in their life that you've got no knowledge of. There could be stuff going on in the organization that they're dealing with that you have no knowledge of, because it's not kind of common knowledge. It's not out there yet. So my advice is take that approach, that don't assume that you're doing a bad job. You can ask the question, what could I be doing even better? How can I develop? How can I improve? What do I need to do? But equally, remember, it could just be the other person. It could be on them. And at that point, you really need to think about whether that's the right role for you or not.
I think number one, if you are in a situation like that, you have to have a honest conversation, communications with that person. And if you are committed to trying, you have to be able to show your willingness to
Mm,
improve and really take into consideration what it is that they're looking for. So let's just assume that this person, they have good intentions, and they really do want you to succeed, right? Let's think positive. So I think for you, if that's a situation, you need to be very clear of like, okay, Have the conversation of like, what are they looking for? What do they need to see? Write those down. Once you finish that meeting, write down exactly what this person said and then start creating a plan of how you can show them that you are working towards what they are expecting. Now, earlier in our talk today, I talked about communicating the process. This is actually a perfect example of that. You know, your manager, for example, might be expecting 100, but you're not 100 yet. But maybe you are at 20, 30. But I think what is so strategic about communications is you can communicate as you're working up to 100. You don't
Mhm.
have to be at 100 for you to be like, okay, here it is. Show them, right? You know, action is more powerful than words. I think that's true for work. So if you're in a situation like that where you feel like people might be doubting you or you're feeling like there might be some miscommunications or misalignment, this is where you really have to double down on communications. So, as we, I can't even believe it, as we wrap up here, Gemma, what are some last minute tips you would love to share with our folks in regards to communications and resilience?
I think kind of just wrapping up some of the things that we've talked about. And remember, look at it like bouncing forward. So you're learning as you go. It's an experiment. Like no one is the best communicator straight away with whatever they do. And even I think about the ways that I communicate, like sometimes I think I'm going to do an amazing presentation and it just really doesn't feel amazing when I'm doing it. Or sometimes I'm like, oh, that's really not going to go well. And it does. So, life surprises us. So if we're looking at everything like an experiment, I'm going to learn as I go. Even someone that, my job really is to present, I still have to learn as I go and be committed to doing that as well. And remember as well, like when it's okay for it to be too much sometimes as well. It's okay. Part of resilience is regenerating. It could be rest, it could be recuperation. It's not always pushing through. So if you get to the point where it does feel quite hard with what you're working on with communication, you can take a break as well. And you can come back to it refreshed.
Jacinta just gave a really good comment. Effective teamwork begins and ends with open, honest communication and hearing what isn't said, right? Sometimes I think communications resilience is being able to read between the lines a little bit, right? And just
Mhm.
again, understanding human nature and that no situation, no person is perfect. There's so many other things that we don't know, but the thing is, we just got to try. We just got to
Mhm.
do it. So for those who are listening right now, if you think back to something that you really want, you've been wanting to ask for, you've been wanting to do, I hope you took this event as some sort of inspiration, perhaps, right? Of how can you move forward? How can you put yourself out there and just grasp what you want? And here's the thing, if you get told no and you feel very discouraged, it's okay. Just
Mhm.
try again.
Mhm.
So, uh, Gemma, I just want to thank you so much for your time. It is so fantastic to have you here. What an honor. And for all the guests who are here, we're so glad you were able to spend some time with us today. Again, I host these Soulcast Media Lives about every week or so, every other week. So if you're interested in our upcoming events, we have a lot coming up. Just go to our website, soulcastmedia.com/events, and then you can RSVP for those there. I also want to share if there's anything that Gemma and I talked about that you're like, wait a second, I didn't get to write down all these notes. We do it for you in the VIP communications pass, which you should see the QR code on your screen. You'll get the show notes from this event and all the events, and we basically just do the work for you to compile it for, again, this event and all our future events. So, Gemma, where can people get connected with you if they want to ask you questions or just follow your work?
The easiest way is on LinkedIn or Instagram. So they're the two places where I share kind of coaching videos and tips and the Mindset Matters newsletter and all of that jazz as well. So that's probably the easiest way.
Yes, and same. For those who don't follow me already, you can follow me here on LinkedIn. I'm probably most active on LinkedIn, but I also have Instagram as well. And actually, one other quick housekeeping tip. We also have a membership program here at Soulcast Media. It's called the Soulcast Media Membership, and it's a communications membership where every single month you learn a new communications topic where I teach it. The announcement is the doors are closing this week. So we are closing the doors and we will probably be opening it again sometime in the fall, but I'll tell you the prices will be increasing then. So if you are interested in getting in now, this is your opportunity. If you want to find more information about the membership, go to our website, soulcastmedia.com, and you can find all the information there. All right. So, Gemma, thank you so much for taking the time. And again, thank you everybody who stayed on. We hope you found this enjoyable and helpful, and we will talk to you all soon. Take care,
Bye.
everybody.